Would you like to make a website without any media queries? What about having a container query that's looking at the size of the parent rather than the size of the viewport? Does that sound cool? Well, check this out. What you see on the screen right now, there's no media queries involved in any of that, and it works. You want to know how? Keep on watching. I'm so excited for this video, and just before we get to that, if you are new here, my name is Kevin, and here at my channel we learn how to make the web and how to make it look good with weekly tips, tricks, and tutorials. And I do want to say a big thing before I start in this idea isn't mine, and how this works, it isn't mine. It's an idea called the Holy Albatross, and it's by Heydon Pickering. So I have linked to his site as well as the 2 blog posts where he talks about it down below. They go into a lot more information on like how he got the idea for this in the first place. But it's just absolutely amazing. I had to share it once I figured out and really understood how it worked. It's something I've known about for a little while, but it took me a while to really have the time to dive into. What I have done is put a few timestamps down below because I'm really going to go into how this works, because it is a little bit of a CSS hack. So I want to explain all the different steps so you really understand what's going on. But if you really want to just get like the juice of using it, you can use the timestamps below to see the different parts, and you can sort of join in where you want to join in. I would really also recommend checking out Heydon's site, as well as his Every Layout, which he's done with Andy Bell. There's some really cool ideas over there on how CSS, the types of ways we can treat layouts with CSS, which are really, really cool. And with all that out of the way, let's jump in and see how this works, because I don't want to wait anymore. This is too cool. I don't want to wait anymore. Let's dive into it. All right, so let's jump into here in VS Code. And I just want to show you one thing I've set up is this here at the bottom, which is the width of my columns, and we'll see what that is in a second. But I just have a little watcher there that's paying attention to what the width is, because that's going to help us out as we progress through that. So it's my width indicator right here. And the first thing I'm going to look at is the issues with Flex, I guess, in a way. So if we look at my markup, I have my container, and then I have this div of columns, which I have 3 cards inside of. And the idea here is if I do my columns and I do display flex on that, it's going to give me 3 columns. So that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But then let's give this a, let's leave it like that just for a second. And the big issue here is if I go small, they sort of really squish. And then at one point, if they can't squish anymore, they'll overflow. But if I go bigger and bigger and bigger, like I'm going, they're hitting my container size, which is why they're not growing anymore. And there is a maximum size that they'll reach to, but let's just, for now, we have them going like that. And here actually in Flexbox, we can add a gap. So let's add a space in between them. This is, actually, I'm not even sure. Has this hit production in Chrome yet? Oh, it is. Look at that. It's getting there. It's only at 40% support, so maybe don't use it yet, but for this demo, I'm going to use it because it makes my life easier. So we have that. That's great, but at these small sizes, that's an issue. And one thing we can do to actually fix that is whenever we have a display flex, we can also do a flex wrap of wrap. And the idea with this is if there isn't enough room, that they'll actually wrap instead of overflowing out the side, which is a good thing. Because if we had 10 items, they would just shoot out the side. Like they don't want to. But when I do that, well, now we run into this issue of here they're small and they're going like that, but now they're never coming up one next to each other. And that's because when we have the wrap on, they want to get to their natural size, which is in Flex, they're going to match the content that's inside of them. So actually, let's just come back to here in this middle card, so my second card right there. If I add a little bit more lorem, so let's add lorem 20 new words of lorem. And so now you can see that one's actually getting wider because there's more content in there. So it's trying, it wants a single line like that. It's going to grow to the size of its content by default. And you know what? I think we could actually leave that on there. It might help show everything we're doing. So we get this thing where they're all different sizes even now, which is kind of awkward. And there's a few different ways that you could approach this. So what I'm going to do is just to show one thing we can do. And this is one of the really important things in understanding how this Holy Albatross works, because it has a really strong reliance on something called Flex Basis. If you don't know about Flex Basis, and a lot of people don't, it's sort of setting the default or the ideal size of something, how big you want that thing to ideally be. So right now they're sort of set to max content, right? So they're trying to match their content, but I can tell them a different size than that. And if you don't set a Flex Basis, it will use the width, like the auto on this. If I set a width on these guys, so if I did width here of, say, 50 pixels, their flex, oh, this is blank. Got a little error there, but they're going to go down to 50 pixels. So if there is no flex basis, they're going to use the width. But if you set a flex basis, it will actually override the width, I believe. So here, what I want to do on my flex basis, let's just go with 100% for now. And this is, now you can see that they're all growing and they're all trying to be 100%. So we don't get that weird issue where they're not the same. So flex basis is sort of saying the ideal width, but you'll notice that, let's say I put this down to 50%. They're 50%, but they will stop at one point. They're not going to keep being 50%. So whatever the flex basis is, it's the ideal size that you want them to be. And this would be the same if I set this at 400 pixels. They're 400 pixels. They're going to stay at 400 pixels until I get to here. And now they're going to start shrinking. So again, this is the ideal size, but flex is kind of weird. When we use flex, it's not dealing with absolutes anymore, even if we set an absolute. So that's really important to understand. So that's one of the concepts. Flex basis, it's an ideal size that something wants to be. The other thing is the default for flex items. So when you have a flex item, notice how there it was shrinking. And that's because by default, items have a flex shrink of 1, which means they're allowed to shrink, and they're all going to shrink at the same speed. They also have a flex grow on them, but the flex grow by default is 0, meaning they won't grow. So the flex basis is 400. We'll turn that back on for a second. So they want to be 400 and they're not allowed to grow, but they're allowed to shrink. So we're saying be 400 pixels, but if you don't have enough room, you're allowed to be smaller. But you're not allowed to be bigger, and that's the flex grow being at 0, and that's the default for them. But this actually uses a very healthy use of flex grow and turning it on. So by putting the flex grow to 1, now it means they can grow and they can shrink. Now, the thing that's interesting also with this though is when we start getting to bigger screen sizes, remember they're allowed to grow, but they want to be 400 pixels. So what if there's room for 2 of them to fit next to one another? Well, that's going to happen. They want to be 400. So if they can be 400 pixels, they're going to shrink back down. But now there's not enough room for 3 of them to go next to one another. So even though let's just move this down like that a little. So there's enough room for 2 of them, but not the third. So you get this really awkward layout in a way where you get 2 columns and then a third one there. And maybe sometimes that would work for you. And if we go big enough, I don't have enough room. If I made this smaller, let's just do 200. We should be able to get 3 columns. Those 3 columns will turn into this weird layout like this. And then at small sizes, they'll stack on top of each other. But with a healthy combination of your flex grow, this we don't need because that's the default. But with your flex basis and your flex grow and a flex wrap of wrap, because if the wrap was off here, they're not going to wrap. So it doesn't really matter. They're always just going to be next to each other. So you need to have flex wrap on, which means if there's not enough room, they can go underneath. And then if it does go underneath, if I didn't have flex grow on, we would get this where they're not growing and you get this one little lonely guy sitting there and it looks kind of awkward. So my flex grow is saying, okay, I can stretch the whole way across. Cool. Following along so far. If you're not sure, I would really strongly encourage you to play with this code. Like follow along with me here, do some stuff because there are some things in here that are a little bit strange for sure. So if you follow along or play with the numbers, do what you need to just to try and reinforce what's happening here, and it will click. You'll figure it out as you go along. So here that's working. So we sort of get this. It is a responsive layout, which is nice, but this middle zone is kind of awkward. Now there is another thing though that's really interesting with flex basis. If it's a positive number, let's just put 1 here, 1 pixel. The ideal is 1 pixel, but they're allowed to grow. So they can be bigger than 1 pixel to go next to one another. Okay, that's cool. But something interesting with flex basis is if it's a negative. Want to guess what's going to happen before I hit save? Let's go and take a look. Bet you didn't see that coming. Maybe you did. If you did, good stuff. But when it's a negative number, it will stack. No matter what, I'm going huge, I'm going small, they're stacking one on top of each other. So that's kind of interesting, right? So knowing that, if it's a negative number, they stack, but if it's a positive number that they go next to one another, how could we get all that to happen without having to make any media queries here to change it? You can use calc. Calc is amazing. Calc is awesome. So on my flex basis here, what I could do is give a size, and this is why I have this guy on right here. So I'm going to give 500 pixels. And I'm going to minus 100%. Aha. Now this is, and you see I saved and something happened there. So 500 pixels minus 100%. Well, what does that mean? So my flex basis is 500 minus this number. because 100% always looks at the width of the parent. And in this case, the width is columns. That's what the number here is showing me. So this isn't looking at the viewport. This is looking at the columns. And I guess if you want to do this more like a media query, you could set this up with viewport units instead. But the fact that this can be a container query is just so cool. And we're not all the way there yet. This isn't going to solve our problem, but it gets us really far along. So what happens here is if we're above 500 pixels, we have a positive number here. Remember, positive number was giving us columns. And if we shrink this down and wait for it, it's going to happen around 500. Won't be perfect, but around, oh, yeah, look, it is at 500. Okay. Or no, right around 500, as I said. I didn't think it would be exactly at 500. And now all of a sudden it starts wrapping. And if we go a little bit smaller, we'll get to there where they collapse on top of each other. And just to show you that this really is an approximation, if I bring this all the way up to like 800 pixels, it's not going to happen at 800 because you're going to see here it's working, but now it's at like 600 when it's making the switch instead of closer to 500 where it was before, and it's still not exact. We're still getting that 2-column thing before it stacks one on top of each other. This is just because of the nature of Flexbox, where it tries to fill in that middle ground automatically. It's an ideal size. It's not an absolute size, right? That's the whole idea behind Flex Basis. But is there a way we could push this number to be really big? And if it was a really big number, maybe, just maybe, it's going to behave the way we want it to. So I'm actually going to take another calc here. And I do want another calc because I want to make sure that the subtraction happens first. So I'm going to do a calc here, all the way around that. And we're going to say times 999. And it doesn't have to be 999. It just has to be a pretty big number. And what that's going to do is, because the number is so big, so it's saying once this becomes a negative number, it's going to be a really big negative number. And once it becomes a positive number, it's going to be a really big positive number. And what that does is it takes out that middle ground that we were dealing with before, where Flexbox was trying to fill in the gaps a little bit. So let's put this to 600 and see how it works. So below 600 pixels now, we're stacked. And then when we get to 600, oh my goodness, and look at this. This should be exactly, they're 599. 600, like as soon as I cross that, boom, we get 3 columns. Isn't that sort of magical? Like super amazing magical, like boom magical. And the fact that like it just works, I think this is so cool. Now in his article, he also does suggest setting this up with custom properties, which is a nice way to push it as well. And of course you don't have to use pixels here. I could do something like, I think it'd be around 35M-ish. I'm just ballparking that, but that's close enough there to 600, so you can use M's and other things like that. But definitely if you want to set this up with a custom property, it could be a little bit more robust as well. I'm not going to dive into that right now, but what I do want to show you is the power of this in another sense, which is how we can actually use it in a bigger way, in a sort of a more important way. And here I have this other div that I've created called another section, not the best name in the world, which is right over there. And so what I'm going to do actually is, because we have this columns and all this is already set up, we can actually come in here and I have my container, I have my columns, and I'm going to wrap that. It's maybe not the best columns. I know I can do the wrap thing, but whatever. Another section, and it's going to close there. So I'm just wrapping this. Let's just look here. I end up with 2 children. I have, this is one child, which is my 3 there, and then I have this white section down there. So let's hit save on that, and now we get this 2-column section. I'm also going to get rid of columns because it's finding, let's just turn off that width indicator because it's finding the wrong one. Didn't plan for that. So we'll just hide you away for now. Or even maybe I could switch that over after. But what it's going to be doing is, notice how now, what I've done actually just for that other section, I have set a max width on it. So even though the flex grow on that should be 1, a flex grow won't overwrite a max width. So here I have a max width on that. It's like a sidebar section. What's really cool here is, or actually, maybe we don't want that. Let's turn off that max width. I have another solution that we could use instead of that. Right here, max width. We'll turn that off. And instead of that, what we could do is change the flex grow on it. Flex grow is like a scale. So 1 means if everything is set to 1, they'll all grow at the same rate. But I could put like a 0.2 on this, which means it's going to grow a lot slower than the other ones, which it won't set a max width on it. But it should set. Oh, it should set a maximum size. The only problem is that other section is coming after this. There we go, that'll fix it. So the flex grow on that will be limited a little bit. Maybe that's a bit too small. Let's go with a 4. So the cool thing with this is it's not looking at the viewport, which is usually what we're looking at. This is looking at the container that it's within. So it's looking at that columns that is right here. So here, if I look, when it grows, boom, we're getting 2 columns right there. But even though this hasn't switched, so we're getting 2 columns, and these are staying 3 right here. And what's really interesting now is as that continues to grow, at one point, this area here is going to hit our 35M. And boom, it goes to 3 columns there. And we end up with almost a 4-column layout here. So you have your sidebar, and then you have the different parts in that. And then it works and everything is fine. And then again, we shrink there. And we're not getting this weird middle ground where this strange stuff happens. So it's really, really cool how that can work. And so you get, once this big parent is at 35M in width, it's switching from stacking to 2 columns. And then once this child here is getting to 35M in width, it's switching right there, boom, to be 3 columns over there. So it really is like a container query. It's looking at the width of the container. It's not looking at the width of the parent. I don't know about you, but this for me is really, really cool, and completely not only can reduce our reliance on media queries, but it can also, the fact that we can look at the parent's size is just really, really cool and a lot more versatile. It makes it so we can really focus on the bigger elements. It might seem a little bit hacky to you, like it's definitely not like this like super clean solution. We do have to push things a little bit, but there's nothing wrong with that. We've been using CSS hacks forever, and if anything, this is a really clean one compared to some of the stuff we used to use. So I am so excited about this. I really hope you're really excited about this too. If you are, and if you think this is a really cool solution that you can see yourself using, please do leave a comment down below to let me know about it. I would really strongly recommend that you do go check out those the 2 articles by Heydon. So thank you very much for watching. If this is your first time here and you enjoyed this video, this is pretty much what I do here. We try and have fun with CSS, explore CSS. Sometimes it's more deep dives like this on pushing things a little bit. Sometimes it's just having fun building a layout and everything in between as well. We jump into design, all that stuff. If that sounds good and you haven't yet subscribed, do please consider subscribing. Thank you very much for watching. A huge thank you to my patrons for helping make all of this possible. Your support is absolutely amazing and blows me away. So thank you guys so very much. And of course, until next time, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.